Quick, tell me the racial and gender composition of your entire group of friends, coworkers, fantasy football league, church, and neighborhood. That way I can determine whether or not you are a racist or a sexist, because that seems to be where we're heading. Whether it's things like income, college attendance, corporate boards, housing loans, or practically anything else, the number one factor that seems to be used in order to determine whether or not bigotry is present is whether or not the racial and gender breakdown of the corporate board, the school, or whatever else it might be reflects the national average. Ibram X. Kendi has gone so far as to say that when he sees racial disparities, he sees racism. And he isn't alone. Some of the most powerful people in Washington argue that racism and sexism are the driving forces in economic disparities. And here are some of the statistics they use to prove it. In the United States, whites make up 60% of the population, but they account for about 84% of the wealth. Racism. Women are being paid 25% less for the same work as men. Sexism. And the millions of people stuck in jobs that refuse to pay them a livable wage are disproportionately women and minorities, so racism and sexism. And while all of these data points can seem pretty convincing, one person has probably done more than anyone else to dispel them. A black man born in the era of Jim Crow, who lost his parents at an early age, a former high school dropout, and someone who considered himself a Marxist for most of his college years through Chicago and Harvard. He's probably not the person you would be expecting to dismantle the economic narratives coming from the left. And yet, Stanford economist Thomas Sowell makes an art form of it. Don't believe me? Watch as Sowell breaks down the question of whether or not wealth disparities are primarily a result of racism.
In 1960, which would be almost 100 years after the end of slavery, 22% of black kids grew up in homes with only one parent.
Just 22%?
Yes.
4 out of 5 were in homes with both parents?
Yes. 30 years later, after the liberal welfare state, that number had more than tripled.
What about pay disparities between men and women?
If you're talking about women with the same number of years of experience, with the same continuous service, etc., then when I look at that, I don't find that disparity. I find, for example, in many cases, the women are making more, depending on how you break the data down.
And finally, is it true that millions are trapped in minimum wage jobs for the majority of their life?
Well, what it really does, as you pointed out, probably more so than a whole lot of other people, is that it prices low-skilled, inexperienced people out of a job.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, I had my first job. I thought my boss was very harsh. In retrospect, I don't know how the man put up with my incompetence.
So if Thomas Sowell can so easily dispatch these popular narratives, why do they persist? And it turns out he's got an answer for that as well when he said, "It is usually futile to try to talk facts and analysis to people who are enjoying a sense of moral superiority in their ignorance." I'm Nick Freitas with the Y Minutes, and we'll see you next week.